I never thought I'd outlive the house on Maple Lane. That's the first thing that hit me the day I stood in front of number 47 with a cardboard box in my arms and the estate agent's keys cold against my palm. The paint had peeled away in long, tired curls, the porch sagged like an old man's shoulders, and the roses my Arthur planted the year we married had turned wild and thorny. But the windows still looked at me the same way they did in 1962, soft, knowing, a little bit sad, as if they'd been waiting 63 years just to see me come home one last time. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 87 years old. Most people my age have forgotten more than they remember, but not me. I remember everything. Every creak of that staircase, every smell of Sunday roast drifting through the hallway, every tear that ever fell onto that faded blue sofa. The house kept them all, tucked away in the walls like pressed flowers in a book. And now the children have decided it's time to sell because, Mum, you can't manage the stairs anymore, and because the taxes are too high, and because, well, they have their own lives in cities far away that don't have room for an old woman and her memories. So I came back alone, just for 1 week, to say goodbye properly. I turned the key, and the door side opened the way it always did, like it was relieved to see me. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint sweetness of lavender sachets I used to sew and hide in every drawer. My legs trembled as I stepped over the threshold. Arthritis has made a stranger of my body, but the floorboards still knew my weight. They greeted me with the same familiar groan they gave the very first night Arthur carried me over them, laughing because my wedding dress was too long and I kept tripping. I set the box down in the hall and just stood there, letting the silence wrap around me. You know, that kind of silence that isn't empty? It's full of voices that aren't there anymore. I heard my mother humming in the kitchen, even though she passed in '79. I heard our Susan practicing piano scales long after she moved to Toronto and stopped playing altogether. I heard Arthur calling me Evie Love from the garden, asking if I wanted tea. I heard babies crying and teenagers slamming doors, and 1,000 ordinary days that somehow added up to a whole life. I walked from room to room that first afternoon like a ghost visiting her own past. The living room still had the dent in the wallpaper where little David swung the golf club he got for Christmas in 1974. I smiled at it, then cried, because David is 58 now and hasn't spoken to me in 6 years, not since the argument about his father's headstone. I ran my fingers over the fireplace mantel and felt the tiny burn mark from the bonfire night in '68 when the spark jumped and caught Ruth's sleeve. She screamed, I smothered the flame with my bare hands, and Arthur kissed the blisters better while the children danced around us with sparklers. Upstairs, the bedroom looked smaller than I remembered. The big brass bed was gone, taken by the grandchildren who needed it more, but the outline of it was still there in the worn carpet. That's where Arthur drew his last breath on a rainy Tuesday in March 2009. I lay beside him all night holding his hand, telling him about the cruise we never took, the places we meant to see. When the sun came up, he was gone, and I stayed in that bed for 3 days, waiting for the world to notice it had stopped turning. I thought the hardest part would be the bedroom, but it wasn't. The hardest part was the little room at the end of the hall, the one we painted sunshine yellow, when we found out I was expecting again after thinking we were done. We lost that baby at 20 weeks. We never painted over the yellow. It faded over the years, but it never quite went away. I sat on the bare floor in there for a long time, palms pressed against the walls, whispering sorry like I always do when nobody's listening. Evening came soft and slow. I made myself a cup of tea in the same brown pot Arthur bought me in 1965 because it had a chip spout and was half price. I carried it out to the back step and sat where I sat every evening for 47 years, watching the sky turn lilac over the willow tree that gave our street its name. Fireflies blinked on and off like tiny lanterns saying goodnight. I used to call them fairy lights for the grandchildren. Now there are no grandchildren running through the grass. They're grown and busy and kind enough on the phone, but distance is a slow kind of forgetting. That first night, I slept in the sleeping bag I brought, right in the middle of the living room floor, because I couldn't face the emptiness of the bed without him. I lay awake listening to the house settle around me, the way it creaked and breathed just like it always had. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The next morning I started in the attic. There were boxes and boxes of things nobody wanted anymore. School reports, birthday cards, the children's baby teeth in tiny envelopes, theater programs, love letters tied with faded ribbon. I found the dress I wore to my wedding, still wrapped in the tissue paper from the dry cleaner in town. It was ivory lace with tiny pearl buttons down the back. My waist was 19 inches then. I held it up to myself and laughed until I cried, because time is the cruelest thief of all. I spent the whole week like that, moving slowly from room to room, touching everything one last time. I polished the banister with the same lavender wax I used when the children were small and slid down it on cushions. I swept the kitchen floor and remembered the Christmas Eve Susan dropped the trifle, and we ate it anyway. Glass bowl, and all shattered on the tiles. I washed the windows with vinegar water so the light would come in clear again, the way Arthur liked it. On the fourth day it rained, a soft, steady English kind of rain that made the whole street smell of wet leaves. I put on one of Arthur's old cardigans, sleeves rolled up 6 times, and went out to the garden. The roses had gone mad without him to prune them. I took the secateur from the shed, hands shaking, and started cutting back the dead wood. Thorns tore my skin, but I kept going until my palms were scratched and bleeding and the rain washed the blood pink down my wrists. I talked to him while I worked, told him about the great-grandchildren he never met, about how Ruth finally retired from nursing, about how I still set 2 places at the table, sometimes out of habit. I told him I missed him every single day, but that missing him had become the shape of my life, like a shadow I carry inside my chest. By the end of the week, the house looked loved again, even if it was only for a moment. The floors gleamed, the windows sparkled, and the garden, well, it would never be tidy, but at least the roses had room to breathe. The estate agent came on the last day. Young man, polite, called me Mrs. Carter in that careful way people do when they're afraid you might break. He walked through the rooms nodding and taking photographs. I followed a few steps behind, feeling like a guest in my own life. When he left, I locked the door for the final time. I didn't cry then. I was all cried out, or so I thought. I walked down Maple Lane one last time, past the houses where friends used to live. Mrs. Henderson at number 52, who brought me soup when Arthur was in hospital. The Wilkins family, who moved away after the fire. The oak tree where the children carved their initials in 1981. Everything was smaller now, or maybe I was bigger with sorrow. At the end of the street, I turned around for one last look. The for sale sign swayed gently in the breeze. The house stood quiet and straight-backed, the way Arthur used to stand when he was proud of something. And that's when the tears came, great heaving sobs that bent me double on the pavement. Because it wasn't just a house I was leaving. It was the place that held every version of me that ever existed. The young bride, the tired mother, the grieving widow, the grandmother with flour on her apron and stories on her tongue. All those Evelyns lived inside those walls, and now they would be gone forever. I don't know who will buy it. Maybe a young couple starting out, full of plans and paint samples. Maybe someone like me, looking for a quiet place to finish growing old. I hope they're kind to it. I hope they fill it with noise and mess and ordinary, beautiful days. I got into the taxi that would take me to the care home in the next town. The driver asked if I was all right. I told him yes, because what else could I say? He carried my small suitcase and the cardboard box that now held only 3 things. Arthur's wedding ring on a chain, the yellow baby blanket I knitted in 1972, and a single red rose I cut from the garden at dawn. As we pulled away, I pressed my hand to the window and whispered the words I whispered every night for 63 years. Good night, my love. Sleep tight. See you in the morning. The house grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared. But I carry it with me still, every room, every echo, every ghost of laughter and tears. Some things are too big to leave behind, no matter how many miles you travel. And maybe that's the secret nobody tells you when you're young. Home isn't a place. It's the shape your heart learns to make around the people you love. And once it learns that shape, it never forgets. I closed my eyes and let the taxi carry me forward into whatever time I have left. Behind me, the house on Maple Lane stands waiting for its next story to begin. And somewhere inside its walls, if you listen very, very carefully on a quiet evening when the willow tree brushes against the window pane, you might still hear a woman's voice singing softly to the children who used to live there, to the man who used to love her, to the life that was hard and imperfect and utterly, heartbreakingly precious. You might hear me, because some goodbyes are never complete. Some homes never really let you go. And that, my dears, is the truest thing I know.